Welcome back to Tech Stack for all you tech enthusiasts. In this video, we will cover data binding in Angular. Data binding is Angular's way of keeping your component and your template in sync. It makes sure the UI updates when your data changes, and your data updates when a user interacts with the UI. Angular provides two main types of data binding: one-way data binding, interpolation, property binding, event binding, two-way data binding, using ngModel. We'll look at each of these step by step. Now open the Pages folder in the integrated terminal and create a new component named Data Binding. Perfect. The component has been created successfully. Now we will start with interpolation. In interpolation, data flows from the component to the HTML template. We simply use double curly braces and place the variable inside them to display its value. Now, let's create a variable named department name. We assign the value HR to the variable department name. Now bind the department name variable in the HTML template using double curly braces. This will display its value on the screen. Now run the application using the ngserve command so we can view the output in the browser. The application is now running on localhost, port 4200. Now copy the selector of the data binding component and use it as an HTML tag inside the app component HTML file. Next, copy the class name of the data binding component and add it to the imports array of the app component decorator so Angular recognizes it. Here, you can see HR displayed on the screen. It is the value stored in the department name variable. Whatever value the variable holds, it will be printed here using interpolation. Now, let's cover property binding. Property binding allows you to bind any HTML attribute or property to a variable from your component class. It's a way to pass data from the class to the template dynamically. Now create text box. To use property binding, we wrap the HTML property inside square brackets and assign it the variable department name from our component. As you can see, the text box is rendered with the department name value. This is because property binding connects an HTML attribute or property directly to a variable from the component. Now let's bind a CSS class using property binding. First, create a class named Danger and set its text color to red. Now create a variable called className and assign it the value Danger. Now create a paragraph tag and bind its class attribute using property binding with a class name variable. As you can see, the text is now showing in red. That's happening because we successfully applied the CSS class using property binding. Now let's bind the type attribute of an input field using property binding. Now let's create a variable called input type and assign it the value checkbox. Now create an input field and bind its type attribute to the input type variable using property binding. As you can see, the input field is now displayed as a checkbox. This is because we bound its type attribute to the input type variable. Now, let's change the value of input type to radio. As a result, the input field will be displayed as a radio button. Now let's cover event binding. In interpolation and property binding, data flows from the TypeScript class to the HTML template. But in event binding, data flows from the HTML template back to the TypeScript class, usually when a user interacts with the UI. In JavaScript, we create a function using the function keyword. For example, function showMessage. In TypeScript, you don't need to use the function keyword. Inside the showMessage function, we can display an alert with the message, "Hello." Now create a button in the HTML template and call the showMessage function using the click event. In JavaScript, we typically use onClick to handle click events. But in Angular, we use the click event binding syntax, where the event name is wrapped in parentheses. As you can see, it worked perfectly and the alert message is displayed. Now, let's apply event binding on a dropdown. First, create a select dropdown and add the options: Austin, Denver, and New York. Now we will create a change city function, and whenever the city value changes, we'll display an alert saying city changed. This will help us understand how Angular handles event binding. Now we're going to bind a function to the dropdown's change event so that Angular can respond whenever the selected city changes. As you can see, the alert appears every time we change the selected city. Now let's move on to two-way data binding, which allows us to keep the data in the component and the value in the UI perfectly in sync. First, we need to add Forms module to the imports array. Forms module is required for enabling two-way data binding in Angular. Now, let's create an input text field that we'll use for implementing two-way data binding. Now, use the ngModel directive on the input field to enable two-way data binding between the component variable and the input value. Bind the ngModel directive to the department name variable so that any changes in the input field update the variable and vice versa. As you can see, when we make changes in the input field using ngModel, the value is automatically updated everywhere it's used, in the paragraph, in the other input, and any bound properties. That's the power of two-way data binding in Angular. As you can see, if we change the value in this input, it does not update anywhere else. That's because property binding is one way. Data flows from the component to the template only. If you're passionate about learning new technologies, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Tech Stack, and keep learning new skills. Thank you. And remember, consistency is the key to success.